Welcome to the NASA Manned Spaceflight Museum kiosk. There are 8 museum buildings and 2 simulator buildings and a testing section. The museum store is located in the Mercury wing. To enter the museum, make a selection and press the Start button. You may visit other parts of the museum by pressing the Select button. Once you have made a selection, press Start. Please make a selection. Welcome to the Information Kiosk. The NASA Manned Spaceflight Museum is divided into 8 buildings covering the entire history of the American manned spaceflight. You are currently standing in the main hall of the museum complex. At any time, you may use the Select button to review a museum. As you move through the halls and museums, you may stop at any time and learn more about the displayed photographs. When the right and left arrow icons appear, click the left side of your mouse button. By left mouse clicking, you will be able to view each of the historical photographs. You may listen to audio at each picture by clicking the speaker icon. The testing department is open 24 hours a day and offers 3 levels of testing. Students will be challenged with multiple choice questions concerning NASA and manned spaceflight. It is suggested that you become thoroughly familiar with all museum exhibits before attempting the testing challenge. The simulator departments are available for all museum visitors. No appointments are necessary. The museum store is open 24 hours for your shopping pleasure. Restrooms are located on the lower level. Please enjoy your visit at the NASA Manned Spaceflight Museum. Additional product information is available in the README file. Project Mercury. The Project Mercury Museum contains information about NASA's first space flights dating from 1961 through 1963. There were 9 missions in total, 6 that were piloted. The Mercury capsule was designed to carry 1 person into space and test whether man could survive spaceflight. Each spacecraft's name ended with the number 7. This indicated the total number of astronauts chosen for the Mercury project. To tour the Project Mercury Museum, press Start. Project Gemini. The Project Gemini Museum covers the U.S. space program from 1964 through 1966. Gemini's purpose was to create techniques required to land man on the moon before the end of the decade. 12 missions were designed to place 2 men in space. Their goal, to develop rendezvous and docking techniques with other spacecraft. To tour the Project Gemini Museum, press Start. Project Apollo. The Project Apollo Museum covers NASA's manned space flights from 1967 through 1972. The purpose of these missions was to land men on the moon and then return them safely to Earth. Drawing on the knowledge and experience gained from Mercury and Gemini, NASA undertook 8 missions that accomplished the goals of the program. Apollo 11 was the first to land on the moon on July 20th, 1969. To tour the Project Apollo Museum, please press the Project Apollo button on this display panel. Skylab. Skylab was the first American effort to have a reusable space station in Earth orbit. It was assembled from Apollo parts that included the Saturn V rocket's S-4B stage. 3 missions were launched between 1973 and 1974 that docked with Skylab. Until February of 1974, Skylab served as a laboratory for scientific experiments. In 1979, Skylab re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, destroying America's first space station. To tour the Skylab Museum, press Start. Please make a selection. Welcome to the Information Kiosk. Space Shuttle. The NASA Space Shuttle is a versatile, reusable spacecraft that can be utilized as a research laboratory. For commercial satellites, the space shuttle can serve as a repair platform, and it also has defense and commercial satellite deployment capabilities. Work began on the space shuttle in 1972, and the first flight took place in April of 1981. To tour the Space Shuttle Museum, press Start. International Space Station. This large space station, built by a consortium of countries led by the United States, has been designed to remain in Earth's orbit for an extended period of time. Initial hardware launches will commence in 1998, and the space station will be fully completed by the year 2001. The ISS will serve as a living and working environment for international crews to use as a base of operations for scientific experiments and observations. To tour the International Space Station Museum, please press the International Space Station button on this display panel. Mars Mission. This museum will exhibit the current NASA plans for a manned mission to Mars. The exhibits will include spacecraft design, mission profiles, exploration techniques, and how humans will cope with long durations of space flight. To tour the Mars Mission Museum, press Start. Simulator 1. This room has 2 Apollo mission simulators, including a lunar landing simulation and a lunar module docking simulation. To experience Simulator 1, press Start. Please make a selection. Welcome to the Information Kiosk. The NASA Manned Spaceflight Museum is divided into 8 buildings covering the entire Project Mercury.
This is a historic photograph of Alan Shepard standing next to President John Kennedy during an awards ceremony after completing his historic Mercury mission. This is a picture of the Goldstone tracking facility located in California. These various antennas are designed to keep track of America's spacecraft, not only manned but unmanned missions as well. This picture was taken during the funeral of the Apollo-1 astronauts. Located on the right side of the picture is President Lyndon Baines Johnson. This is a photograph of Dr. Werner von Braun and technicians during the launch of a Mercury spacecraft. This is a picture of one of the various control rooms utilized during a typical space shuttle mission. This is a photograph of one of NASA's large mainframe computer systems. These computers were used during the Apollo space program. This black and white photograph shows technicians during the launch of a Mercury spacecraft. This firing control room was located at Cape Canaveral in Florida. This picture is of the Challenger 51L crew before their untimely deaths. This picture taken of the Apollo 11 crew after their landing and during a press conference with President Richard M. Nixon. This is a construction picture of the mobile launch platform which was utilized to launch all of the Saturn V rockets. It is currently the transportation workhorse utilized for launching America's space shuttles. This is an early photograph of Dr. von Braun watching a launch in the safety of the launch blockhouse located at Cape Canaveral. This picture of Gordon Cooper riding in an open limousine. Also in the car is Vice President Johnson. This is a picture of the firing control room located at the Kennedy Space Center. There are 2 control rooms located at the launch center. This is an early photograph of Dr. Wernher von Braun working at the White Sands Missile Test Range in New Mexico. Dr. von Braun was crucial in the design of the Saturn V rocket. This is Mission Control in Houston, Texas. There were 2 control rooms designed and built to service the Apollo moon missions. These control rooms later utilized for Skylab and the Space Shuttle. This is a picture of the Vehicle Assembly Building located at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, midway through its construction. This picture was taken during the commencement ceremony honoring the Mercury 7 astronauts. This photograph of the historic Apollo-1 spacecraft shortly after the launch pad fire, which killed the 3 astronauts, Grissom, Chaffee, and White. This early black and white photograph shows the construction of one of the mobile launch platforms used during the Apollo moon missions. This is a picture of Mercury Mission Control. Note in the foreground, astronaut Gordon Cooper acting as capsule communicator. This is a photograph of the early mission control located at Cape Canaveral. This control room was used for Project Mercury and for several of the Gemini missions. This picture shows the 3 mobile launch platforms utilized during the historic Apollo missions, 2 of which are still in service, launching America's space shuttles. This is a photograph of Alan Shepard leaving the transfer van on his way to the launch pad moments before his historic Mercury mission. This black and white photograph shows the technicians during the launch of one of the historic Mercury missions. Located on the steps of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., President George Bush honors the crew of Apollo 11 during the anniversary of their historic mission.
The Space Act is signed into law by President Eisenhower on July 29, 1958, and on October 1, 1958, NASA comes into being. Glennon recalls Eisenhower's feelings about space.
He was not a space cadet. He used to say, as he looked over his shoulder, and he'd say, you know, Keith, that moon's been there a long time. It's going to be there a great many eons yet, and we'll get there one day, but it isn't necessary we break our necks and break the budget to get there now.
Okay, what about congressional support at the time?
Congressional support was really very good. As a matter of fact, they were pushing us. I don't think in my 20 months there that I ever had a budget proposed to them that they didn't want to add something to. My stock answer was, I have studied this, we have presented you with a budget which is what we think we can usefully use. If we need any more, you may be certain I'll come right back to you. That seemed to satisfy them.
Before NASA is born, Keith Glennon is president of Case Institute of Technology and former commissioner of the Atomic Energy Commission. Then Eisenhower nominates him to be first NASA administrator in August 1958 with Dr. Hugh Dryden as deputy. And NASA is formed from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Glennon explains.
And we did inherit the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics operation, NACA as it was then called, of which Lewis Laboratories was one. There were 4 or 5 such laboratories, 3 big ones, Ames, Langley, and Lewis, and one at Wallops Island in Virginia and one out in Edwards Air Force Base in California. But we had 8,000 well-trained, loyal, dedicated people in NACA, and they formed the base on which we erected NASA.
NACA was formed in 1915 to supervise and direct the scientific study of the problems of flight with a view to their practical solution. NACA was required to direct and conduct research and experiments in aeronautics. The committee was responsible for many of the advances in U.S. aviation through 1958. Some space-type research is done in later years, but emphasis was on airplane research. Again, Glennon tells us what happened in NACA space research.
NACA had been doing development work, largely at Langley, as I recall it, on the shape of a capsule that might be used in an up and down flight like actually Mercury started out to be, and finally into an orbit. The problems of trying to get adequately capable people in a variety of fields meant that we had to look other than in NACA, and it became apparent very early on that our real limitation was in the launch vehicle business, the booster rocket, as we then called it. We really didn't have any. We had been using sounding rockets, small things that went up and accumulated information, and telemetered it back to the ground, but we didn't have anything that really would lift very much with any degree of surety. So I guess it was probably in November, might have been late October of 1958, that I made a trip to Huntsville with Hugh Dryden, my deputy, and one of the very, very great men in this space program. His name cannot and will not ever be forgotten. We came back. It is clear that von Braun had a real strong team there, very capable. We did try to get that laboratory, or part of it. I didn't want the whole thing. They had work going on for the Army. The Pershing missile was in development at the time. And they had as their really scientific support the Jet Propulsion Laboratory managed by the Caltech out on the West Coast near Pasadena.
Mid-July 1975, an American Apollo spacecraft and a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft prepare to join in Earth orbit, 140 miles above the Atlantic near Portugal. During their two-day joint flight, astronauts and cosmonauts transferred between spacecraft. They conducted space experiments, and they tested a compatible rendezvous and docking system, evaluating its potential as the universal standard on future spacecraft for docking and rescue. The mission climaxed more than 3 years of planning and preparation, a time during which differences in language, in technology, in political creed were set aside in favor of the common goal. This was the mission that opened the door to international manned spaceflight.
President Kennedy asked Vice President Lyndon Johnson to head a study of what is needed to beat the Soviets in the space race. NASA's 10-year plan calls for a manned orbital flight around the moon. The question is, can the U.S. be the first nation to orbit a man around the moon? The technical answer is maybe not. So the proposal is made that the goal be extended to the surface of the moon. On May 25, 1961, President Kennedy speaks before a joint session of Congress to define a new national goal.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.